Nobody believed her. Not her fans, not her friends, not even the people who cheered her name every night under the bright lights. Behind the ring's glamour, she was fighting a darker battle, one that left scars no camera ever caught. He choked her, threw her against a wall, and almost ended her life. But instead of breaking, she rose, stronger, louder, and unafraid. When she filed that criminal complaint, the truth finally came out, and the world realized who the real fighter was. This is her story. In the world of professional wrestling, some stories write themselves. They were the story. She was Lyra, the Starlight, the undeniable champion whose fire inspired millions. He was Kane, the architect, the industry's golden boy, destined for immortality. Together, they were magic. They were the power couple splashed across program covers, their shared victories in the ring feeling like a real-life fairy tale. When she held her championship high, he was the first to embrace her. When he won the main event, her applause was the loudest. The cameras loved them, and the fans adored them. This wasn't just a partnership, it was a dynasty. To the outside world, their life was a relentless highlight reel. They lived in a high-rise condo with glass walls, overlooking a city that seemed to worship them. They trained together, traveled together, and smiled for countless selfies with fans at airports. The company built entire storylines around their chemistry, blurring the line between the characters they played and the people they were presumed to be. It was the perfect narrative. Two generational talents, finding love in the brutal, chaotic world of sports entertainment. They were the anchors of the brand. They were untouchable. But the brightest lights always cast the darkest shadows, and the problem with a perfect picture is that it's usually framed. The glass walls of their home weren't just for the view, they were a cage. The change was subtle, so subtle, in fact, that the roaring crowds never noticed. It began not with a bang, but with a suffocating silence. The laughter in their behind-the-scenes social media videos seemed practiced. Lyra, once the most vibrant and outspoken woman in the locker room, became quiet. Her promos in the ring still had their fire, but the light in her eyes was flickering. The first time it happened, she missed a show. The official report was minor travel complications. The truth was a handprint on her arm, skillfully covered by the makeup department, who were told she'd had a fall during training. Her friends in the locker room would ask, "Hey, you okay? You seem distant." Lyra would force the smile that paid her bills. "Just the road, you know? Tired." Kane, meanwhile, grew more charming in public. He became more protective, often answering questions directed at her, explaining that he was just letting her rest her voice. It was seen as romantic. Nobody questioned why the Starlight suddenly needed someone else to speak for her. Nobody saw the drive home from the arena, where the car was filled with a tension so thick you could barely breathe. Nobody saw her wiping off the mask of the champion, only to reveal the haunted face of a woman trapped. The adoration of millions meant nothing when the person closest to her was the one making her feel the most alone. It wasn't about a match. It wasn't about a storyline or a missed spot in the ring. It was about a text message from an old friend, a simple, "Are you safe?" that he saw flash across her screen. That's all it took. The architect facade crumbled, revealing the insecure rage beneath. The argument started in the kitchen, the epicenter of their supposed domestic bliss. It was the same argument they always had, the one where he accused her of being ungrateful for the life he was providing, the one where he reminded her that the company saw him as the real star. But this time, her silence wasn't fear. It was exhaustion, and her exhaustion was seen as defiance. He grabbed her. Not like in the ring, where every move is a planned dance. This was jagged and hard and real. When she tried to pull away, he shoved her against the drywall. The sound was a dull, sickening thud. The Starlight, the woman who fought 300 nights a year, was pinned. And then his hands were around her neck. She remembered the strange details, the polished granite of the countertop cold against her back, the smell of his cologne, the realization that she couldn't make a sound. She wasn't fighting a heel under pyrotechnics. She was fighting for air. In that moment, staring into the eyes of the man the world adored, she knew. This wasn't a bad patch. This wasn't a passionate relationship. This was the end, one way or another. Or he left. He always left after. He'd punch a wall, grab his keys, and peel out of the garage, leaving her to clean up the mess, both physical and emotional. But this time, she didn't ice the bruise. She didn't call her sister and cry. She sat on the cold kitchen floor for an hour, the silence of the apartment deafening. Then she stood up, grabbed her car keys, and walked out. She drove for 20 minutes, not to the airport, not to a hotel, but to a 24-hour police precinct in a part of town the tour buses avoided. She walked past the fluorescent hum and the smell of stale coffee, her championship belt just a piece of luggage in the back seat of her car. The officer at the desk didn't recognize her. She was just another woman, with puffy eyes and a tremor in her voice, filing a report at 3 a.m. "I need to report a domestic assault." Saying the words out loud made them real. It was terrifying. Every instinct, trained by years in a business built on secrecy and protecting the brand, screamed at her to turn around. "You'll be fired. You'll be blackballed. They'll call you a liar." But the feeling of his hands on her throat was louder. She sat there for 3 hours, detailing everything. Not just tonight, but the months of isolation, of control, of fear. When she finally signed her name to the affidavit, it wasn't a moment of victory. It was the deepest, most agonizing breath of her life. The match had just begun. It took less than 12 hours. A wrestling news blogger with a source inside the police department got a copy of the complaint. The headline was explosive. The internet tore itself apart. The first wave wasn't sympathy. It was disbelief. It was rage. At her. The comment sections were a sewer of betrayal. "She's lying. Kane would never." She was always jealous of his main event push. "She's probably crazy. She's just trying to ruin his career." The fans who had painted her face on signs, the ones who had cried during her championship victory, were the first to call her a traitor. They had loved the fairy tale, and she had just ripped out the final page. She became a prisoner in her own home, not by him, but by the world. Every refresh of her phone brought a new wave of hatred, of death threats, of vile dissections of her character. She's not a victim. She's an opportunist. Kane, meanwhile, posted nothing. His silence was seen as dignity. He was the stoic hero, being attacked by a scorned woman. Lyra learned the hard way that the crowd doesn't cheer for the person. They cheer for the story they've been sold. And she had just broken the story. She had turned their hero into a villain. And in their eyes, that made her the monster. The machine she had dedicated her life to, the fans she had called her family, had turned on her in an instant. The next week's show was the loneliest place on earth. The arena was buzzing, but backstage the air was thick and cold. Nobody knew what to say. The boys' club mentality was in full effect. The male wrestlers, many of whom had known Kane for years, either avoided her gaze or gave her a look of pitying judgment. Why couldn't she handle this in-house? Why did she have to go to the cops? She was breaking the code. The female wrestlers were different. A few of the younger ones offered silent, supportive nods. But the veterans, the ones who understood the politics, kept their distance. They had their own careers, their own glass ceilings to worry about. Speaking up for her was professional suicide. The management called her into a sterile, windowless office. It wasn't a checking on her meeting. It was a damage control meeting. They spoke in corporate euphemisms. They were concerned about the brand. They hoped for a swift resolution. They reminded her of the morals clause in her contract, a threat veiled as a reminder. They asked her to stay off social media. They weren't protecting her. They were silencing her. She was no longer Lyra, the champion. She was the situation. She was a legal liability. As she walked through the hallway, she could hear the whispers stop as she passed, only to resume the second she was gone. She had never felt more like an outsider in the only home she had ever known. They told her to take some time off. It wasn't a request. She was quietly removed from the upcoming events, her championship vacated due to personal reasons. The silence was deafening. She was alone in the high-rise condo, now feeling more like a mausoleum. The glass walls just showed her a world that was moving on without her. One afternoon, she found herself in her home gym, staring at a life-size cutout of her in-ring character. The starlight stared back, muscles flexed, a confident, unbreakable smile on her face. Her merchandise was everywhere. Action figures, t-shirts, championship replicas. They all screamed words like fearless, warrior, unstoppable. It felt like a cruel joke. The woman on the poster was a lie. The woman in the mirror was terrified. She was the one who flinched when a door slammed. She was the one who couldn't sleep. The disconnect between her public persona and her private reality had become a chasm. This was the dark part of the journey they never wrote into the storylines. There was no referee to stop the match, no script to guarantee her comeback. The media was calling her a liar. Her colleagues were calling her a problem. And the fans. The fans were calling her a villain. She looked at the action figure in her hand, the plastic approximation of her strength, and for the first time, she wondered if the starlight was ever real at all. Kane finally broke his silence. He didn't do a wrestling promo. He posted a carefully produced black and white video. He wasn't in his ring gear. He was in a soft, neutral sweater. He looked tired. He looked sad. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice heavy with concern. He never denied her claims, not directly. Instead, he used the language of therapy and gaslighting, weaponized for a global audience. He said Lyra was going through a difficult time and that he was praying for her. He mentioned the pressures of the industry and how it can affect people's mental health. He wished her nothing but the best and hoped she would get the help she needed. It was a masterpiece of public relations. He was the victim, the concerned partner. She was the unstable one. His comments were flooded with support. So much class. A true professional. We're with you, Kane. It seemed to be the final nail in her coffin. But then, something small happened. A former female wrestler, one who had been with the company years ago, long before Lyra, left a comment on the video. It was just one word. Again? The comment was deleted within minutes, but the internet is forever. Screenshots were taken. Suddenly, the narrative had a new thread. Bloggers and fans started digging. Again? Who else? The PR shield had just sprung its first tiny leak. The perfect facade was beginning to crack. The court of public opinion is fickle, but the court of law requires receipts. The legal process moved forward, slowly, painfully, away from the camera flashes. This wasn't a ladder match. It was a war of depositions and discovery. And the evidence was not ambiguous. There was the 911 call from that final night, a recording of her whispering to the dispatcher from a locked bathroom, terrified he would hear her. There were the text messages, dozens of them. "I'm so sorry. I blacked out. It will never happen again." Followed by, "You make me this way. You pushed me." And then, "If you tell anyone, your career is over." A security camera photo from a hotel hallway 6 months prior, which Lyra had saved, showed her with a bruised cheekbone, an injury she had reported as a ring accident. Bit by bit, the digital breadcrumbs and audio files painted a picture that no PR firm could erase. The truth. The bloggers who had called her a liar began to issue quiet retractions. The fan forums that had savaged her went quiet. Then, the first tentative hashtags appeared. "We believe Lyra." It wasn't the roar of an arena. It was a fragile, growing whisper. The world was beginning to realize that the heel and the babyface weren't who they thought they were. The starlight hadn't been lying. She had been surviving. The end didn't come with a dramatic trial. There was no Perry Mason moment. Kane took a plea deal. He pleaded no contest to a lesser assault charge to avoid the 911 call being played in open court. The company issued a 2-sentence statement. Kane has been released from his contract. We wish him the best in his future endeavors. It was over. He was gone. She had won. The fans who had doubted her flooded her with apologies. The company called, talking about a triumphant return and a new Survivor storyline. They saw a new way to make money, but this is where the story takes its turn. Lyra didn't come back. The cheering, the apologies, the offers. It all felt hollow. The victory wasn't in exposing him. The victory wasn't in winning back the fans. She realized the entire system was sick. The machine that built her up was the same machine that protected him. The fans who adored the character were the same ones who abandoned the person the moment she became inconvenient. The fight wasn't just against Kane. It was against the facade. Her last public post wasn't a promo. It was a photo. It was her wrestling boots, unlaced, sitting in the center of an empty, dark ring. The caption was simple. Thank you. She walked away. She walked away from the lights, the legacy, and the noise, because nobody understood the real twist. Filing the criminal complaint wasn't the moment she became a fighter. It was the moment she stopped performing as one and started being one. And the real fighter knew that the only way to win was to leave the cage entirely.